The morning sun of the summer day beat down on the dusty windshield of the car as Michael gripped the steering wheel, guiding it along the winding road towards the campground. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter, Emily, gazed out of the window with a mix of excitement and curiosity. The radio hummed with news of criminal activities and suspicious sightings, but Michael, not wanting to listen, turned it off abruptly. He wanted to have a fun and relaxing time on this camping trip, which was meant to be an escape from the stress that lingered in the aftermath of recent problems. Emily, once known for her adventurous spirit, was now subdued by the scars of said problems, carrying the weight of them on her small shoulders. Michael hoped that this trip would help rekindle his daughter's spirit. He hoped the pristine wilderness would provide the solace they both needed. Arriving at the campground, they checked in at the reception, the only building aside from the small shower and restroom facility in the main campground area. Seeking solitude, Michael chose a remote campsite in the back of the campground, set way apart from the common area. It was right next to the lake, but at a far side of the lake that is bent a bit around the corner, and out of sight from the rest of the lake. This distant location promised tranquility and peace. They drove down to their remote campsite and got out of the car. Even though it was still morning, the day was already hot, and thankfully Michael and Emily had chosen to wear light clothing. Michael was dressed in a pair of shorts and a light t-shirt. Emily was dressed in a very short sundress, a reflection of her suppressed vivacity. And she had packed several more identical sundresses, her preferred choice for the days ahead, each one symbolizing the escape they sought. After reapplying their sunscreen, Michael and his daughter set up their tent together, a symbol of the adventures that awaited. With the campsite ready, they embarked on a walk around the campground, admiring the natural beauty of the area. They even strolled around the main campground area, meeting fellow campers along the way, including a woman who seemed peculiar, but still friendly. After their walk, Michael and Emily returned to their campsite, where they hung out together for a while as the morning continued to progress, the two of them engaging in small talk and laughter. Emily's infectious giggles lifted Michael's spirits, momentarily easing the weight on his shoulders. The ever-increasing heat begged for a refreshing dip, and Michael conceded to Emily's eagerness to swim in the lake. He fetched Emily's swimsuit, but when he turned to give it to her, he discovered that she had already shed all of her clothes and plunged into the water in her birthday suit. Michael stood there for a moment, frozen, just holding her swimsuit and feeling a bit silly, but then he shrugged it off with a chuckle and an eye roll and accepted the situation, not wanting to spoil Emily's impromptu joy. He sat down at the lake's edge and watched his daughter swim and play in the water. Her carefree antics were a heartwarming sight that contrasted with their recent turmoil, and Michael felt a surge of happiness, greater than any happiness he had felt in quite some time. As Emily repeatedly glanced at her father, their eyes locking in shared joy, Michael's heart swelled with love. Emily asked her father a couple of times to join him in the water, and both times he declined, although a small part of him secretly wanted to join her. Finally, Emily playfully splashed water at him, sending a surge of previously dormant playfulness through him. Shedding his clothes, he plunged into the water chasing after his giggling daughter. She turned around and started running and swimming away as her father chased after her, but he quickly caught up to her and grabbed her. They playfully struggled and wrestled together, and Michael playfully slapped his daughter on the behind, both of them laughing hysterically. They continued swimming, playing, and splashing together, the bond between them strengthening with every shared moment. And the fact that they were skinny dipping made the experience even more freeing. Michael couldn't help but revel in the happiness, happier than he had been in quite a while, and grateful that they were far removed from the clutches of Emily's abusive mother. After the playful escapade in the lake, the two of them lay side by side together on the shore, sunbathing and drying off, all the while exchanging glances and smiles that spoke volumes. At one point, Michael couldn't help but glance at a scar on Emily's stomach. A surge of anger flared briefly inside him, directed at Emily's mother, but it ebbed away, leaving behind a determination to cherish their newfound freedom. Eventually, they got up and got dressed, albeit with Emily ironically choosing to wear her swimsuit. Her father chuckled a bit at this, knowing that his daughter could be a bit odd and silly at times. Once they were dressed and had reapplied their sunblock, they strolled back over to the main campground area together. Back at the main campground area, Michael and Emily went around and interacted with various campers, some of whom they had already met, and some whom they had not met yet. They even saw that peculiar woman again, who, again, was nice, but also definitely seemed a bit strange. In fact, she seemed to follow them around at times and eyeing both of them with a seemingly suspicious and oddly longing expression. It wasn't to the extent where she seemed to have dangerous intentions, but something did seem a bit off about it. Michael and Emily ended up spending a lot of time with a friendly family they had already met upon arriving at the campground. This family consisted of a husband, a wife, and their son, Daniel, who had just turned 10 years old, and his parents had taken him on this trip as a late birthday present. Michael and Emily joined this family for lunch. The two kids, Emily and Daniel, struck up a conversation and started hitting it off extremely well. They happily conversed and laughed together, and Daniel even admired and complimented the flowery design on Emily's swimsuit, and remarked sadly on how he had been bullied in the past for enjoying such girly things like that. Michael couldn't help but smile as he watched his daughter and Daniel bonding, and he himself meanwhile happily chatted with the husband and wife, the wife's gentle demeanor providing a stark contrast to Emily's mother. The conversation meandered towards Emily's abusive mother, including her unhinged reaction to the judge's ruling at the custody hearing, which had only further cemented the judge's decision, and the relief of her absence after said hearing. Granted, it wasn't the most pleasant topic, but it did feel nice for Michael to be able to open up about it to someone besides just his therapist. After they all finished their lunch together, Daniel and his parents invited Michael and Emily to go fishing with them. Embracing the camaraderie with their newfound friends, Michael and Emily accepted the offer. They all went down to the lake together with their fishing gear and got into a boat and out onto the water. It had been years since Michael had gone fishing, but he still knew how to do it. Despite not catching any fish, Michael enjoyed the experience, especially since he was sharing it along with other people, and it brought a sense of normalcy back to his life. At one point, Emily, impatient with not catching anything, jumped out of the boat to chase after a fish, but quickly gave up. This drew laughter from Michael and their newfound companions, especially Daniel, who was finding Emily and her antics rather charming and endearing. Michael even jokingly remarked to his daughter that it was lucky that she had chosen to wear her swimsuit after all, given what just happened, which made them all laugh even more. After the fishing trip was over and the two families parted ways for the day, Michael and Emily's day continued to unfold with a short but slightly strenuous hike, a relaxing nature walk, and more introductions to other campers. Among these other campers were a nice couple who had set up their campsite well away from the lake due to their fear of water. As the night started to set in, Michael and Emily took a shower together at the campground's shower facility, a shared moment of cleansing that mirrored the cleansing of their souls from the burdens they carried. Following this, the two of them went back to their campsite and enjoyed a campfire, roasting marshmallows, and campfire songs. Emily surprised her father with her beatboxing skills, providing a lively accompaniment to one of the campfire songs, specifically Sarasponda, adding a layer of amusement to the night. Later that night, after putting out the campfire, Michael and Emily took a path over to a clearing near their campsite, where they lay down together on the soft grass under the stars. The night air carried the rhythmic symphony of crickets, providing a serene backdrop to their stargazing adventure. As father and daughter pointed out constellations, the vastness of the cosmos seemed to dwarf their earthly concerns. The night brought a sense of connection with nature, a reminder of something greater than the troubles they left behind. Michael contemplated the idea of being surrounded by this beauty every day, but then, the realization struck that the rarity of such moments made them all the more precious. The crickets provided a soothing soundtrack as they continued to stargaze, their hearts entwined with the cosmic dance above. Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for this trip, a reprieve from the shadows that loomed in their recent history. They finally retired to their tent again, and lay down together to go to sleep. Emily fell asleep fairly quickly, snuggling against her father, as he wrapped his arm around her. Michael lay awake for a bit, reveling in the memories and happiness of that day. But then, a sense of unease started to grow within him as he heard what sounded like distant footsteps. They seemed to be heading right in their direction down the little road that led to their remote campsite from the main area. Michael protectively wrapped his arm a bit more tightly around his daughter as the footsteps continued to get closer to them, and then suddenly stopped. A slightly tense silence followed, and then the footsteps resumed, except this time they seemed to be receding, heading back the way they came. Michael lay silently as the footsteps faded into distance and out of hearing range. Who was it? Another camper, perhaps? One of the campers they met that day had said he liked going on late-night walks. Or perhaps it was that strange woman? Several minutes passed, and no more footsteps were heard. The only sounds he heard now were the crickets and other natural sounds of the night. His sense of unease lessened somewhat. He reasoned to himself that it was just one of the other campers. And the other campers seemed fine. Even that woman, while strange, didn't actually seem harmful, and still better than his ex-wife. But he still couldn't help but have a slight feeling that something was off. Nevertheless, the feeling wasn't too extreme, and he managed to push it out of his mind and go to sleep. The next morning, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, father and daughter awoke to the sounds of nature stirring. A new day promised more adventures and the continuation of their quest for solace. Newcomers appeared on the campground, campers at a remote site not too far from Michael and Emily's haven. Despite keeping mostly to themselves, there was a friendly nod exchanged, a subtle acknowledgement of shared space in the vast wilderness. Michael and Emily spent part of the morning going on a slightly longer and more strenuous hike than the one they went on the day before. Even though the hike was mostly uneventful, they both enjoyed it immensely and continued bonding over it. Emily even had a few comedic mishaps during the hike, one of which involved her slipping and falling onto her but with an amusing squeal, and these mishaps, which both Emily and Michael found amusing, further enhanced the enjoyment and bonding experience of the hike. At the top of their hike, they sat together and enjoyed the view. At one point, Michael glanced at his daughter and shared a loving smile with her, and he reached out and affectionately ruffled her hair. After they came back down from the hike, they took a peaceful and relaxing walk around the lake, and arrived back at their campsite. Emily was a bit tired from the hike, but before long, she got her energy back and started playing, her father watching her affectionately. At noon, Michael and Emily went to the main campground area together, where they shared the afternoon with Daniel and his parents. Laughter echoed as lunch was prepared, the aroma of coffee mingling with the invigorating scent of pine. Daniel and Emily, becoming fast friends, animatedly shared stories of their own camping adventures. After lunch, Michael continued chatting with Daniel's parents and bonding with them. At one point, the topic of Emily's abusive mother came back up again, and Michael opened up about more details about her, as well as her and Michael's messy divorce. Despite not being a pleasant topic once again, just like the day before, it was nice for Michael to open up to someone and share this with them, and Daniel's parents listened attentively and sympathetically. While the parents continued chatting, Daniel and Emily played together, doing various things including playing tag, climbing a tree together, and more. At one point they even admired some beautiful flowers together, which was sadly another, girly, thing that Daniel had gotten bullied in the past for enjoying. Daniel and Emily were getting along extremely well and really enjoying each other's company. Daniel was especially charmed by Emily's antics, playfulness, and adventurous spirit, which had definitely been rekindled by now, just as Michael had hoped would happen. After a while, the two families went and did various things together around the campground. At one point the two families went over to Michael and Emily's campsite together, during which Emily and Daniel went skinny dipping in the lake together. Michael's heart warmed as he watched them frolic and play together in the water, their joyous laughter music to his ears, as he recalled his own liberating skinny dipping experience with Emily the previous day. Emily had always had trouble making friends due to her abusive and controlling mother. But now she finally had the chance to make a good friend, and so quickly too, and Michael's heart swelled with joy as he watched his daughter play and bond with her newfound friend. The two families parted ways as night started to fall, after which Michael and Emily's night played out the same as the previous one: shower together, campfire bonding, and stargazing in the clearing. As they retired to their tent once again, Michael couldn't shake off the faint feeling that something was amiss. Nothing strange or unnerving happened that night, but the memory of the distant footsteps from the night before resurfaced, a haunting reminder that their escape into nature might not be as tranquil as they had hoped. Nevertheless, with a glance at his daughter peacefully sleeping beside him, Michael brushed aside the unease, hoping for another day of bonding and freedom on the morrow. However, the following day, things would take a turn. The next morning they went on a much longer hike than their previous 2 hikes. The bond between them strengthened with each step, the vastness of nature providing a backdrop for healing conversation. Once they reached their destination, they sat together and enjoyed the breathtaking view. The air was crisp, and the silence of the wilderness spoke louder than any words could. A sense of tranquility settled over them as they absorbed the beauty of the world around them. When they descended the trail again, they took a cutoff that led to a trail that led along the side of the lake opposite the campsites. As they walked this trail, they saw the couple who was supposedly afraid of water walking along the opposite shore. This, naturally, struck them as a bit odd, but they didn't think much of it, and they continued circling the lake until they reached their own campsite. Later that afternoon, as they returned to the main campground, a disconcerting scene awaited them. One of the tents near the central area had been ransacked, belongings scattered in disarray. Thankfully nothing had been stolen, but the unsettling reality of criminal activity in their midst began to cast a shadow over the once idyllic campground. Other campers in the area had also gathered around, including Daniel and his family, all of them sharing concerned and uncomfortable looks and words. Even Daniel and Emily shared a moment of concern and slight fear, although Daniel gave Emily a gentle and reassuring shoulder pat, which did soothe her somewhat. At one point, Michael glanced around and saw the strange woman again, standing apart from everyone else. She was fidgeting and acting rather uneasy, almost suspicious, and Michael could even swear that she looked a bit distressed and upset. It didn't seem likely that she was the one who ransacked the tent, but nonetheless Michael's suspicious and uneasy feelings about her were skyrocketing even more than before. The police arrived and launched an investigation, but ultimately weren't able to turn up anything. After the police left, some campers decided to leave. Michael, contemplating leaving as well, found himself torn. Emily, sensing her father's hesitation, pleaded with him to stay, not wanting to have their trip ruined, especially after all the fun they had had so far. Perhaps against his better judgment, Michael agreed to let them stay. However, he did move some valuables into the car and lock them inside, safeguarding them against potential theft. Daniel and his parents had decided to stay as well, and Michael and Emily spent the rest of the day with them until nightfall. However, this time, despite their shared bonding and fun, there was an underlying sense of unease following the ransacking incident. Also, the previous day when they had spent time together, Daniel and Emily had occasionally gone out of sight of the parents for a few minutes at a time, but not too far. But this time the parents made the 2 kids stay in their sight the whole time while playing, their parental instincts on alert. That night, Michael and Emily had their usual shared shower and campfire bonding, and then went stargazing in that same clearing again. But this time a subtle tension lingered beneath the seemingly serene sky, and Michael couldn't help but occasionally glance around at their surroundings. He didn't feel like they were being watched or that there was any danger nearby, but even so, he couldn't shake the lingering paranoia from the footsteps they heard on the first time combined with the ransacking earlier that day. Nonetheless, he was mostly able to push the feeling aside and enjoy this third stargazing experience with his daughter. As they were walking along the path back to their tent from the clearing, Emily urgently needed to pee. With approval from her father, she squatted down and started relieving herself on the path. As she did that, Michael briefly scanned the surroundings, his protective instincts towards his daughter heightened. Once again, he didn't sense any danger nearby, but the paranoia was still flaring, even more so that it was when they were stargazing, and he simply couldn't push the feeling aside this time. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Emily's voice interrupted his thoughts, and he looked down at her. She was looking up at him with a smile, her eyes reflecting a mixture of love and curiosity. "Nothing, sweetie," he replied with a reassuring smile, a wave of parental affection and underlying protectiveness swelling within him. Emily finally finished peeing and stood up, and together they continued heading back to the tent, hand in hand, Michael intermittently glancing at the surrounding shadows. As they entered their tent, Michael's thoughts swirled with a mix of caution and the desire to shield Emily from the unsettling undercurrents. The night, though quiet, seemed to hold a weight of anticipation. As they laid down and cuddled up together, the occasional rustle of leaves and distant sounds of the forest became a subtle symphony, echoing in the darkness. Emily fell asleep fairly quickly, and Michael lay awake for a little while. But then, just as he was starting to drift off to sleep, he heard it. Footsteps. He jolted fully awake again, and his heart sank. Footsteps were approaching the campsite from roughly the direction of the path leading to the stargazing clearing. His blood ran cold. Had they indeed been followed and watched during that time? Or were they just showing up now? The footsteps reached the campsite and stopped just outside the tent. A tense silence followed, during which Michael protectively tightened his grip around his sleeping daughter, fear running through him as he lay there, not daring to make a sound. After what was probably a few seconds but felt much longer to Michael, the footsteps resumed, now circling the tent. They circled the tent several times, Michael laying still and listening the whole time, his mind racing. Was it the strange woman? He didn't even know for sure if it was her footsteps he had heard back on the first night, despite his suspicions. And this time, between the sound and the way they were walking, they didn't seem quite the same as the ones they had heard on the first night. Also, this time there was a much more malevolent air about the whole situation, which had not been present the first night. Michael's mind then suddenly turned to the couple walking by the lake earlier that day despite supposedly being afraid of water. Could it be one of them? That didn't seem right. They had seemed so nice. But then again, there have been many times when even the nicest people had turned out to be monsters. At long last, the footsteps finally stopped circling the tent and started heading away, down the little road that led to the main campground area. Eventually they faded out of hearing range. Michael continued to lay there for several minutes, his arms still wrapped protectively around his sleeping daughter, as he continued to strain his ears for more footsteps. But none came. Nevertheless, he still lay there, alert, ears strained, and filled with protectiveness towards Emily. His heart rate started returning to normal, but he continued to lay awake, unable to sleep for a while. By the time he finally did fall asleep, he had decided that it would probably be best if he and his daughter cut the trip short and left in the morning. The next morning, as Michael cautiously stepped out of the tent, looking all around for potential danger, he noticed fresh footprints circling their tent, the footprints from their mysterious visitor the previous night. The prints indeed seemed to come from the path leading to the stargazing clearing, encircling their campsite several times before heading over to the little road. Michael walked all around the tent and looked in every direction of the surrounding area. When he was sure it was safe, at least for now, he allowed Emily to come out of the tent, which she did. Just then, a twig snapped, and Michael spun around to see the strange woman, who had been hiding behind a tree at the edge of their campsite, looking at them. Looking between her feet and the footprints around the tent, Michael could tell that it hadn't been this woman who had walked around their tent last night. Her feet were too small to have made those prints. But nonetheless, Michael's suspicious and uneasy feelings towards this woman had finally reached their peak, and he decided he had to confront her. In the conversation that followed, it was discovered that the woman, whose name was Sarah, did not have any bad intentions. She admitted that she had indeed approached their campsite on the first night, but not last night, and she was not the one who ransacked that other camper's tent. As it turned out, Sarah had also experienced someone walking around her campsite the previous night, leaving her unsettled and cautious. Sarah then shared her haunting backstory, her vulnerability echoing in her eyes. Her husband and daughter had been shot and killed by armed robbers who had broken into and robbed their house. Michael thought back to how she stood apart from the crowd around the ransacked tent and looked uneasy and distressed, and now it made sense. That incident had obviously resurfaced her past trauma. Sarah confessed to observing Michael and Emily from a distance, admiring the bond they shared, a poignant reminder of the family she had lost. Michael reciprocated with the revelation of his own painful history, his abusive ex-wife, their tumultuous divorce, and even the custody hearing, in which the judge awarded full custody of Emily to Michael and gave his ex-wife extremely limited visitation time with strict supervision, to which his ex-wife had an unhinged reaction, further solidifying the judge's decision. Michael even told Sarah about the origin of the scar on Emily's stomach, which was indeed a result of one of her mother's violent abusive episodes, and was the final straw that caused Michael to finally file for divorce. The exchange of stories created an unexpected connection, uniting them in the shared weight of their pasts. Suddenly, a distant scream shattered the fragile peace of the campground, coming from the direction of the other remote campsite fairly close to Michael and Emily's, where that nice couple who kept mostly to themselves were staying. Michael, Emily, and Sarah followed a small and poorly maintained path that led to that campsite. When they reached that campsite, a harrowing scene unfolded before them. The couple staying at the campsite were being held at gunpoint by masked robbers. Michael, Emily, and Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the weight of terror and helplessness settling over them. But then Emily accidentally stepped on a twig which snapped with a loud crack, causing the robbers to turn and look at them. Everyone stood frozen for a few seconds, during which Michael realized that the main route from this campsite back to the main campground area was on the opposite side of the campground from them, beyond the robbers. Just then, one of the robbers signaled to the other one to go after Michael, Emily, and Sarah. As that other robber started moving towards them, they all turned and ran back along the path. Twigs, plants, branches, and other objects scraped against them as they ran along the unmaintained path. But they didn't care. They kept barreling down the path, hearts racing, the fear of what might befall them palpable in the air. Michael and Emily finally arrived at the other end of the path, back on the little road that led from their campsite to the main area. They realized only now that Sarah was no longer with them. Although they were extremely worried for her safety, Michael and Emily kept running along the little road towards the main area. But just then, the robber chasing them emerged out of the brush and onto the road in front of them, cutting them off, his gun aimed at them. Michael and Emily froze. But then suddenly Sarah appeared out of the brush, sneaked up behind the robber, and attacked him from behind. A desperate struggle unfolded, the masked robber firing his gun, the bullet grazing Emily's sundress and leaving a tear in its fabric, but miraculously leaving her completely unharmed. A surge of white-hot rage coursed through Michael as he lunged at the robber, fighting to protect his daughter. Sarah, seizing the moment, wrestled the gun away, while Michael successfully tackled and pinned the robber to the ground. "Don't you dare hurt my daughter!" Michael roared. "She's already suffered enough at the hands of her abusive mother. She doesn't need any more harm." The robber's mask came off, revealing one of the campers who claimed to fear water, the man they had seen suspiciously walking along the lake's edge with his girlfriend. Michael, still pinning the man down, pulled out his cell phone and called the police. The police arrived and apprehended the two water-fearing robbers. The campground buzzed with activity as the police investigated the situation and spoke to everybody. Fellow campers, drawn by the commotion, watched in disbelief. Many campers, including Michael and Emily, as well as Daniel's family, decided to cut their trip short, shaken by the abrupt intrusion of violence into their serene retreat. Amidst the chaos, Michael exchanged contact information with Sarah, their connection now etched in shared adversity. As they bid farewell to the other campers, a bittersweet sense of departure hung in the air. Michael and Emily exchanged goodbyes and contact info with Daniel and his family, solidifying the newfound friendship between the two families, especially between Emily and Daniel. And luckily, as it would turn out, the two families lived fairly close to each other. Their camping trip, though cut short, had become a microcosm of life, a reminder that while cruelty existed, so did the unexpected kindness of strangers. The journey had fortified the bond between father and daughter, making them acutely aware of the value of the freedom and happiness they had discovered in the heart of nature. The trip, initially conceived as an escape, had transformed into an unexpected crucible, forging resilience and exposing the unpredictable tapestry of human connections. The wilderness, though tinged with danger, had become a place of healing, a crucible for their shared vulnerabilities, and a testament to the unpredictable beauty of human bonds.